I thought family was forever, until the night my father looked me in the eyes and said, "You're not on the list." Imagine dedicating years of your life, giving money, time, and love, only to be erased from your own mother's birthday. They laughed as I left, clutching a gift I'd never see her open. But here's the thing, betrayal doesn't end where humiliation begins. That night, one man stood and froze the entire room with 4 words, "She's my boss." And in that silence, I realized this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The phone rang at 2 a.m., piercing the silence of my apartment like a siren. My heart jumped because when it was that late, it usually meant someone was hurt, or worse. I didn't hesitate when I saw Mom on the screen. I grabbed my keys, pulled on a sweater, and drove across town half awake, the night pressing down like a heavy weight. My chest throbbed with worry. What if she had fallen? What if something had happened to my father? When I burst into the house, breathless and anxious, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with the lights on full. She wasn't injured. She wasn't crying. She was calmly shuffling through a stack of bills, her hand tapping impatiently against a glass of water. Relief washed over me, but it evaporated almost instantly when she looked up and said, "I need $5,000 tonight." I froze. "You woke me up at 2 in the morning for money." She waved her hand like my words were nothing but dust. "It's urgent. Your father doesn't know. Just transfer it." That night, I thought I was saving her. I didn't know I was feeding a monster. I told myself it was just this once, that maybe she had been desperate, that maybe the late-night call meant something terrible was looming. But a week later, there was another call, and another after that. It became a cycle. I handed over pieces of myself disguised as cash, disguised as favors, disguised as silence, and each time she thanked me with a hollow smile that never reached her eyes. At work, I wore a mask of competence. People saw me as steady, reliable, successful. But inside, I was drained, hollowed out by the endless demands from the people who were supposed to love me. Still, I clung to the belief that family loyalty was sacred. Blood is thicker than water, my mother had drilled into me since childhood, and I swallowed it whole. Even when the requests became manipulations, I told myself, they love me, they just need me. But the cracks were starting to show. Once, after sending money, my sister scoffed on the phone. "Melissa, you act like giving a little help makes you a saint. We all sacrifice." I remember staring at the bank statement on my laptop, the red numbers glaring back at me. Help? I was drowning, and somehow I was still the selfish one. It was moments like those that should have opened my eyes. Instead, I pressed them shut, refusing to see. The truth came to me not through some confrontation, not through a fight, but through a tiny glowing screen. I was at my sister's place, watching her baby while she ran an errand. She had left her Apple Watch charging on the counter. A notification buzzed. My name lit up the screen, but not in the way I expected. The preview showed a group chat. My mother, my father, my siblings, all of them. The message said, "Don't invite her this time. She'll ruin the mood." My chest tightened. I tapped the screen. More messages spilled out. Jokes about how dramatic I was. Complaints about how I made everything about money. Plans for dinners and parties I'd never even heard about. My knees went weak. My hands shook. I wanted to throw the watch across the room, but instead I stared at it, my stomach churning with disbelief and nausea. And right there, in those blue bubbles, I saw the proof. I was never part of their family. I left before my sister came home. I got into my car and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, clutching the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Tears spilled down my face faster than I could wipe them away. The street was silent, the world asleep, and it was just me, finally awake. "Tell me you wouldn't have done the same for them," I whispered into the darkness, as though I was speaking to someone sitting in the passenger seat. Because if you had grown up believing loyalty was the highest virtue, wouldn't you have sacrificed too? If you were told your worth came from how much you gave, wouldn't you have kept giving until there was nothing left? I stayed there for hours, staring at the empty road ahead. It was the first time I allowed myself to consider that maybe my devotion had been blind, that maybe my family's love was not love at all, but hunger, a bottomless pit that could never be filled. But even then, part of me clung to hope. I told myself maybe it was a misunderstanding, maybe they didn't mean it, maybe if I just tried harder, they would see me. I didn't know it yet, but that desperate hope was the very thing that would lead me straight into the fire. The night of my mother's birthday, I held a carefully wrapped gift in my hands, my stomach twisting with both dread and hope. I had told myself this was my chance to mend things, to prove that no matter what had been said in those secret messages, I was still part of them. I had driven across town rehearsing the words I would say, imagining the way my mother's eyes might soften when she saw me. When I arrived, the house glowed with laughter and music. Through the windows, I could see the people I loved gathered around the table, champagne glasses lifted high. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe I belonged there, that all of this paranoia was just a misunderstanding. I stepped forward, smiling nervously, but before I could reach the door, my father blocked my path. His face was expressionless, cold as stone. "You're not on the list," he said flatly. At first, I didn't understand. "What list?" He didn't blink. "This is a private party. You weren't invited." Behind him, I could see my siblings watching, their smirks half hidden behind glasses of wine. My mother was at the center of the room, laughing at some joke, not even looking in my direction. The humiliation was instant, like heat rising to my face. I held out the gift anyway, forcing a smile that trembled. "It's for her," I said, my voice cracking. They didn't take it. Instead, someone chuckled, then another. The sound spread like wildfire across the room, until laughter filled the air, sharp, cruel, and cutting. My chest tightened, my throat burned, and all I could do was stand there, exposed, stripped of dignity. I set the gift on the doorstep, turned, and walked away. The laughter followed me out into the night, but as I stepped off the porch, my eyes caught another pair, staring back at me from across the room. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He froze when he saw me, his gaze locked on mine. My sister's boyfriend. A man I barely knew. His eyes widened, not with pity, but with recognition. And that moment lingered like a question I didn't yet know the answer to. I left, holding my breath until I reached my car. My hands trembled so violently, I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The gift sat on the doorstep behind me, abandoned like I was, but the sound of their laughter stayed with me, echoing in my chest like a wound that refused to close. What I didn't know then was that humiliation doesn't always stay private. Someone at the party had filmed the moment on their phone. By morning, the clip was everywhere, shared, liked, commented on, dissected by strangers who didn't know me but somehow felt my pain. The video showed me standing at the door, holding out the gift, smiling nervously as my father dismissed me. It captured the laughter, the smirks, the way I turned away, with my head bowed. By sunrise, it had already gone viral. And something unexpected happened. People cared. Strangers I had never met left messages of outrage. How could a family treat someone like that? This broke me. She deserves better. They weren't laughing. They were furious on my behalf. For the first time, I wasn't alone in my pain. I sat in my apartment, staring at the flood of comments, the thousands of people who had seen the truth I'd been hiding for years. And in that moment, something cracked open inside me. I turned to the camera on my phone, whispering words I didn't even know I'd been holding. Maybe family isn't who shares your blood. Maybe it's who bleeds with you. The words startled me. They weren't rehearsed. They weren't even meant for anyone else, but they were true. For years, I had played the victim, carrying every insult, every manipulation, every cruel laugh, as though they were proof of my own failure. But sitting there, scrolling through the voices of strangers who saw me, who believed me, who defended me, I felt something shift. I realized that the story I had been telling myself, that I was powerless, that I had no choice, was a lie. I wasn't powerless. I had just never chosen to fight. So I did something small, almost insignificant. The next time my mother called, I pressed record before answering. "Melissa," she said, her tone sharp, impatient. "Where's the money? I told you I needed it by Friday." I kept my voice steady, but my hand trembled as the device captured every word. When I hung up, I stared at the recording. My lips curved into the faintest smile, cold and sharp. It wasn't joy, it wasn't victory, it was the first step. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't walking away anymore. I was preparing for war. The first recording gave me a taste of control I hadn't felt in years. I knew it wasn't enough to win, but it was a start. My family had built a fortress of lies, and I needed tools sharp enough to pierce through. That's when I turned to what I knew best: information. At work, I was known for managing complex projects, unraveling numbers and patterns others overlooked. I realized I could use those same skills against the people who had underestimated me my whole life. I began pulling old bank statements, property documents, and even scraps of emails I'd been copied on years ago. On weekends, while my coworkers rested, I sat at my dining table with my laptop glowing deep into the night, feeding documents into software I barely understood but was determined to master. Artificial intelligence wasn't just a buzzword, it was my secret weapon. I taught myself how to scan documents for anomalies, how to detect inconsistencies in signatures, how to map money flowing in circles that didn't make sense. Each revelation left me shaken, but I pressed forward, fueled by the memory of their laughter on my mother's birthday. Then I found it. Buried in the scans was a set of property transfer papers, stamped and notarized, carrying my mother's signature. But the algorithm flagged it as suspicious. I compared it to her handwriting on a card she'd sent me years before. The slant was wrong, the loops uneven. My breath caught in my throat. I checked again, then again. The evidence was undeniable. It wasn't my mother's hand, it was my brother's. He had forged her signature, selling off part of her estate while she was still alive. I sat back, the room spinning, my fingers digging into my scalp, as though I could pull the truth out of my head. And the buyer? Someone I knew, someone closer than I ever imagined. I closed the laptop, trembling. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore, it was criminal. But I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to a lawyer, a woman recommended by a colleague who had gone through her own family dispute. She listened carefully as I laid out the evidence, her face unreadable. "You're not crazy," she said finally. "You're right to document everything, and if you keep going, you'll have enough to burn their fortress down." The words steadied me. At work, I leaned on two colleagues I trusted, people who had seen me at my lowest but never judged. They helped me organize the files, proofing my timelines, ensuring the evidence was bulletproof. And then there was him, my sister's boyfriend, the man whose eyes had locked with mine on that humiliating night. I discovered the truth almost by accident. He worked under me in a different division of my company, his last name easily overlooked. When he knocked on my office door one afternoon, closing it behind him, my stomach sank. "I know what they did," he said softly. I searched his face for mockery, but there was none, only quiet resolve. He told me how he had heard the whispers, how he had seen messages on my sister's phone, how he had watched the cruelty unfold in silence. "I couldn't say anything then," he admitted, "but I'm saying something now." That night, I wrote in my journal, speaking as though you were reading over my shoulder. "For the first time, I feel seen, not by blood, but by someone who had no obligation to me. Maybe that's what real loyalty looks like." Still, the weight of years pressed on me. I booked an appointment with a therapist, something I had resisted for too long. Sitting across from her in the quiet office, I finally let the tears come, my body shaking with all the grief I had locked away. She didn't tell me to be strong. She didn't tell me to fight harder. She simply handed me tissues and said, "It's okay to grieve what you thought you had." That was the release I didn't know I needed. For once, the war paused and I could breathe. But wars don't wait forever. Weeks later, my sister's boyfriend, my unlikely ally, leaned across the table in a quiet cafe. His voice was low, but his words carried weight. "When the time comes, I'll stand with you." I nodded, my heart heavy. I didn't know how much that promise would cost him. Christmas Eve had always been a spectacle in my family's house. Glittering lights, a dining table overflowing with food, carols echoing against the walls. This year was no different. The laughter was loud, the wine flowing, and the smell of roasted turkey drifted through the air. But for me, the night wasn't about celebration. It was about reckoning. I arrived without fanfare, carrying nothing but a small bag that held the evidence I had collected over months. Recordings, documents, the forged signature that betrayed everything. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with focus. My sister glared when she saw me, but I didn't falter. When the family gathered in the living room for the traditional toast, I rose slowly. All eyes turned, some narrowing with annoyance, others rolling with dismissal. I plugged my phone into the television, the screen flickering to life. At first, they laughed. "What are you doing, Melissa?" my father sneered. "Trying to make a scene again?" But the laughter died quickly when the first recording played. My mother's voice filled the room. "Where's the money? I told you I needed it by Friday." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then came the forged documents, the highlighted discrepancies, the undeniable trail of deception. Their faces shifted from smug amusement to stunned silence. And then the twist I had planned carefully. The screen didn't just play for the room, it was streaming live on TikTok. Hundreds, then thousands of viewers poured into the feed, reacting in real time. Comments scrolled across the screen. She's exposing them. Justice is happening right here. The fortress of lies they had built was crumbling not just within these walls, but before the eyes of strangers across the world. But what none of us expected was my mother's reaction. She didn't deny it. She didn't shout. She staggered, clutching the arm of the chair, her face pale, eyes brimming with something I hadn't seen in years, fear. For a moment, she looked so small, so breakable, that it almost cracked the armor I had built. Almost. Then chaos erupted. My siblings shouted over each other, insisting the documents were fake, that I had manipulated the recordings. My father roared about betrayal, his voice booming so loud the windows rattled. My sister hurled accusations, calling me vindictive, jealous, pathetic. The room spun with noise and fury, and then a voice cut through it all. My aunt, quiet, timid, often overlooked, stood up. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "She's telling the truth," she said. "I've known about the forgery for months. I stayed silent because I was scared, but not anymore." The room fell into stunned silence. I could barely breathe. The weight of years pressed against my chest, and for a heartbeat, I wanted to run. My knees buckled, my hands shook, and I felt the edges of panic closing in. But then I felt a hand slide into mine, steady, grounding. One of my friends who had come with me, standing just behind, whispering, "Stay, you've already come this far." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to remain rooted as the storm raged. And then, the twist no one had seen coming. My mother, the woman who had built the web that bound us all, crumpled to the floor. Tears poured down her face as she clutched at my arm. "Melissa," she sobbed, "please, don't do this. Don't destroy us." The sight was jarring, almost unbearable. This was the woman who had demanded my loyalty, who had called me selfish while draining me dry, and now she was on her knees begging. For a moment, I couldn't move. The room had gone utterly still, every eye fixed on me. The laughter that once mocked me was gone, replaced by raw anticipation. Even the stream had slowed, viewers holding their breath behind glowing screens. And in that silence, everyone turned to me, waiting to see if I'd forgive. The days after Christmas unfolded like a storm. The live stream had done its damage, but the true reckoning came when the evidence reached places my family could not control. My lawyer filed the forged documents with the court. The recordings were authenticated, bank transfers, property sales, everything lined up like dominoes falling one after another. The siblings who had once laughed at me now faced subpoenas. My brother's smug arrogance shattered when the forgery was confirmed by handwriting experts. My sister's name surfaced in financial records, revealing she had benefited from the stolen assets. They tried to fight, but the paper trail was relentless. Social media made sure there was no hiding. The clip of me being turned away at my mother's birthday had already gone viral, but now people dug deeper. Screenshots of the forged signature circulated. Commentary videos analyzed every detail. Hashtags trended overnight. My family's name, once polished and respected in their community, became synonymous with betrayal. Cancel culture doesn't forgive, not when the evidence is this undeniable. Invitations to social events vanished, business partnerships dissolved, and friends they had leaned on for years quietly disappeared. The fortress of reputation they had built crumbled faster than I could have imagined. Yet amid the chaos, I felt no triumph. One evening, I sat alone in a quiet park, the winter air biting against my skin. Children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance, a painful reminder of innocence I no longer believed in. I whispered into the empty night, "It doesn't feel like victory, it feels like loss." Because it was a loss. The family I had spent my life protecting no longer existed, if it ever had. Justice had teeth, but it also had a hollow echo. Still, the world didn't stop for grief. The sweetest part of justice arrived in ways I hadn't expected. My sister's boyfriend, no, her ex-boyfriend now, walked into my office one morning. His expression was steady, but there was a shadow of sadness in his eyes. "She and I are done," he said simply. "I can't be with someone who built her life on lies." I searched his face, waiting for resentment, for distance, but instead he continued, "I'm staying here. I still want to work for you. You've treated me with more honesty than they ever did." The twist was sharp, cutting through me in ways I didn't anticipate. My sister had lost him, but I had gained something stronger than romance. I had gained loyalty, the very thing my family had stolen from me. As the court rulings piled up, my mother shrank into silence. The woman who had once orchestrated every manipulation, who had wielded guilt like a weapon, now avoided even looking me in the eyes. Her power was gone, her voice hollow. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I simply watched, a quiet ache in my chest where love used to live. And still, the world whispered around me. Neighbors who once treated me as invisible now stopped me on the street, saying, "We saw what happened. You were brave." Co-workers clapped me on the shoulder, their admiration heavy in their voices. But bravery didn't feel like the right word. Survival, maybe. Endurance, definitely. The final blow came when the judge ruled against my brother and sister. Assets were frozen, property sales reversed, restitution ordered. They left the courthouse pale and shaken, the weight of consequence finally pressing down. I stood outside, breathing in the cold winter air, knowing the story wasn't just mine anymore. It had rippled outward, touching strangers who saw themselves in my pain. That was its own kind of justice, the solidarity of others who now dared to speak. But even as the dust settled, I knew this wasn't the ending people expected. Justice, as sweet as it tasted, wasn't closure. It was a door creaking open to something larger, something I couldn't yet name. I looked ahead, the street stretching out before me, the future unwritten, but waiting. And I whispered to myself, steady, unflinching. But justice wasn't the ending, it was the doorway. The silence that followed the verdict was unlike any silence I had ever known. For years, my life had been filled with the constant buzzing of demands, calls at all hours, guilt-laden messages, manipulations dressed as love. Now, with court orders signed and the truth public, the calls stopped, the texts disappeared, my phone no longer trembled in the middle of the night. I had chosen no contact, and though the first days felt like stepping into an empty void, that emptiness became a balm. I deleted numbers, blocked threads, archived conversations that once chained me. It was terrifying, yes, but also liberating. I began documenting my recovery. At first, it was only for me, Short videos recorded on my phone as I tried to make sense of the rubble my family had left behind. But then slowly, I began posting them online. I thought maybe a handful of strangers would watch. Instead, thousands came. People I had never met sent messages. "You're telling my story." I thought I was the only one. "Because of you, I finally cut ties." It startled me, the way my pain had turned into someone else's lifeline. Somewhere in the middle of recording those videos, I stopped speaking only for myself. I began speaking for all of us who had been silenced by bloodlines that cut deeper than knives. But healing wasn't all fire and triumph. It required rest. It required softness. Each morning, I carved out a ritual. I rolled out a yoga mat by my window, where the early light poured in, gold and warm. Sometimes I stretched in silence, listening to my breath. Other times I stepped outside into the crisp air and walked slowly, one foot in front of the other, letting the sun rise with me. For the first time, I wasn't rushing to rescue anyone. I wasn't scrambling to prove my worth. I was simply existing, and it was enough. One morning, as I paused by the park pond, I turned my camera on myself. "This isn't about revenge anymore," I told my viewers. "This is about peace. This is about reclaiming the parts of me they tried to erase. If you're watching this and you're still trapped in that cycle, listen. You deserve to breathe without fear." The comments flooded in. And in those quiet moments, with the sun warming my face, I felt something I hadn't in years, serenity. Yet life had more in store. As the months passed, I built a new rhythm. Work thrived, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. My leadership grew sharper, my empathy deeper. Colleagues respected me not only for my position, but for my resilience. I formed bonds with people who became more than coworkers. They became my allies, my chosen family. And then came the day that changed everything again, but this time for the better. My birthday. For years, that date had been hollow, reduced to a passing text, or more often, ignored altogether. But this year, I decided to reclaim it. I rented a small hall, decorated it with lights and flowers, and sent invitations to the people who had stood by me through the storm. Friends, coworkers, neighbors, even strangers who had become confidants through my videos. I didn't expect much, a handful of people maybe, but when the night came, the room filled with warmth and laughter that echoed against the walls like music I had never heard before. There was no cruelty in their voices, no mockery in their eyes, just joy, genuine, unfiltered joy. When I walked in, they shouted my name, not with derision but with celebration. Tables were piled with food, a cake glowed with candles, and the air was thick with love I had once thought impossible. Tears blurred my vision as I realized I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. I had simply been looking in the wrong places. At the center of the evening, someone clinked a glass and called for silence. My sister's ex-boyfriend, still my employee, still loyal, stepped forward. "Tonight isn't about loss," he said, his eyes sweeping the room. "It's about rebirth. Melissa taught me what family really means, and now we get to show her." The crowd erupted in cheers. I covered my mouth, overwhelmed, my heart pounding not with pain this time, but with gratitude so fierce it nearly broke me. When the candles were lit, I closed my eyes. For once, my wish wasn't desperate. It wasn't a plea for change. It was simple. Let this feeling last. I opened my eyes and blew them out, laughter surrounding me, love pressing close. Later that night, as the room quieted and music drifted softly, I stood before the people who had become my family by choice. My voice trembled, but my words were clear. I wasn't erased, I was reborn. The applause that followed was thunderous, but what mattered most was the stillness in my chest, the quiet certainty that I finally belonged, not because of obligation, but because of truth. As the night ended and the lights dimmed, I stepped outside into the cool air, my heart steady, my path open. For the first time, the future didn't scare me. It called to me, and this was just the beginning.